The NBA offseason is officially underway as we just saw our first trade just come through this afternoon, and it is a big one as the Orlando Magic and Memphis Grizzlies have gotten in a huge deal surrounding Desmond Bane going to the Orlando Magic for KCP, Cole Anthony, and 4 first-round picks. And a lot of people are overreacting with who really won this trade, and ultimately I think both sides won this trade as both are going to get the benefits of what they want to do this off season by making this move. So we're going to dive in and explore this trade here today on Switch City and go over why it benefits each of those teams. If you guys do enjoy the content, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I have been doing the weekly or the off-season breakdowns for you guys daily. We will have those coming out for you guys once again today, so definitely stay tuned for that. But we had to talk about this. So without further ado, let's dive in and let's break down the trade. So like I mentioned, we saw this trade come in from Shams Charania earlier this morning here, where the Memphis Grizzlies are trading Desmond Bane to the Orlando Magic for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Cole Anthony, and 4 unprotected first-round picks and an own and 1 first-round pick swap, sources tell ESPN. And this was a big deal for a lot of reasons. One, the Memphis Grizzlies, a team that was kind of in the middle of the pack, and I mentioned could be looking to move one of their stars this offseason. And their offseason breakdown ultimately went through and did that move as, like I mentioned in there, with the Western Conference kind of rising and this team dealing with injuries and having some salary cap issues with having to extend some guys, which we'll get into a little bit, it made sense for one of those guys to fall. I just did not expect it to be Desmond Bane, because if we go back to that video, I mentioned that I thought Desmond Bane was the one that was going to stay. So kind of wild about that. For the Magic, in their offseason breakdown, I mentioned that they needed scoring and shooting and went over some guys that they could go out and attain. Like I mentioned, I didn't think Desmond Bane would be available on the table, but I do think that Desmond Bane is the best guy that they could have gotten for this role for this team, and we'll explain in a little bit why I think that as well. But like I mentioned, I think this is a win-win trade for both teams. The Grizzlies ultimately get to shed some salary, get some players that can fill in these roles and get some first-round picks, while the Orlando Magic here get that all-out scorer and shooter alongside Franz and Paolo. So let's dive in and let's look at it. First, we're going to look at it from an Orlando Magic perspective, and this is a new graphic courtesy of Bobby Marks and ESPN here. And when we look at this new lineup, you see a squad of Jalen Suggs, Desmond Bane, Franz Wagner, Paolo Banchero, and Wendell Carter Jr. Wow, that makes me terrified in the Eastern Conference. An Orlando Magic team that went against the Boston Celtics, and even though we're not the best offensive team, held their own on the defensive side and limited the Celtics to scoring a bit, now just added one of the best catch-and-shoot scorers who shoots 50, 40, 90 on the splits last season into this lineup. This is going to be a perfect fit alongside these guys. They also get to keep key guys like Anthony Black, who's a really great defender, Jet Howard, who's a little great of a scorer, Tristan Da Silva, Jonathan Isaac, and Goga Batazde to really fill in that depth of the bench there. As well, the Magic did have 2 first-round picks, and I mentioned that in that video where I did the rebuild looking at them. In their offseason breakdown, they did have the pick that they traded, which I believe was pick 17 or pick 16 and pick 25. And with them having 2 second-round picks as well, the Magic didn't have 4 roster spots to take on all these guys. So it made sense for the Magic to consolidate one of their first-round picks, and it was kind of being talked about, and I did mention that in that video, so I'm not shocked about that. But with this, it puts the Magic, as you guys can see, over into the first apron and close into the second apron. And with team options on guys like Gary Harris, Caleb Houston, Corey Joseph, and Mo Wagner, that would definitely put the Orlando Magic into the second apron with an abundance of guys on the roster, right? They would have 5, 8, 14 guys currently under roster, and with drafting these 3 other pieces would have 17. Therefore, I do think the Magic will still have some trades out on the edges, or maybe even potentially decline some of these team options, as Bobby Marks mentioned, as now their second apron is triggered because of the aggregation. Because the apron levels next season are not finalized, I would expect some sort of team options to be declined as part of this deal, and Orlando can now trade their own first in consecutive years of 25 and 26 because they have the Denver first in 2025, and that's how they have the 25th overall pick. But when looking at the picks that they did trade, it's not really that much of a haul for the Memphis Grizzlies. They did trade their number 16 pick this year in the draft, like I mentioned, which was expected to move either the 16 or 25. 16 has more value, so it makes sense. They did trade their 2026 first, which includes the swap rights from either Phoenix and or Washington, which we'll get into the complications of that, as that is the most intriguing pick here. The 2028 first, their 2030 first, and they have the swap rights for a 2029 first, with it being a top 2 protected pick. Ultimately, in my opinion, with the Orlando Magic here, with their young core of Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, and all this jazz, adding alongside a guy in Desmond Bane, it proves to me that this team is going to be in contention not only this season, but also for the next couple seasons as well. And that was why those 2028 and 2030 picks don't necessarily scare me as much, as if we look in the Eastern Conference and specifically in the Southeast Division, the Orlando Magic have the best path to dominate and control that division as we see it for now, but also for the future. The Heat are a little bit in a weird spot. The Wizards and Hornets are both a little bit younger, and obviously the Atlanta Hawks are a little bit in the middle ground as well. I feel like the Orlando Magic have that really locked up, and by making this move, it only furthers that for the future as well, with young guys like Paolo and Franz Wagner still being in their mid-20s as well. They're going to continue to grow and continue to get better, alongside a piece in Desmond Bane that I think is really going to help. You also add Desmond Bane, who, like I mentioned, is probably the best shooter out there on the market. We talked about players for the Orlando Magic, guys like Anthony Simons and Kobe White, but I do think a guy like Desmond Bane is better in that regard. Like I mentioned, 50, 40, 90 shooting splits last season. He also isn't going to take as much commanding of that playmaking role as a guy maybe like Kobe White or Anthony Simons would by adding them in, and allows Jalen Suggs and Paolo Banchero to still once be those control playmakers and still kind of run through this offense, with having a scorer on the wing in Desmond Bane to easily just kick out from the post or from the wing to easily just hit a knockdown 3. And we've seen Desmond Bane be able to do that consistently in the playoffs over the last couple seasons, so I see him doing that for Orlando. Now, I do want to mention here as well, when looking at these picks for Orlando, we mentioned that 2026 pick has some complications, so here it is. It obviously belongs to Phoenix or Washington, maybe even to Memphis or Charlotte. Washington has the right to swap the first round pick, protected for selections 9 through 30, but Phoenix's 2026 first round pick, Orlando has the rights to swap, yada yada yada. Very, very complex. If you really want to read this, pause the video and get some more information. Basically, it's going to go to the lowest team that it ultimately falls to, and that could be very valuable for a team in Memphis, which we'll get into just in a little bit. But when looking at this from an Orlando perspective, like I mentioned, I think it is a key win. Even though you are going into the second apron, yes, you might lose Gary Harris. Yes, you might lose Corey Joseph, but those were veteran guys that were playing roles that were filling in for that scoring and shooting that you desperately needed but didn't have. Now that you have a guy in Desmond Bane, you don't necessarily need those guys. Bring back Mo Wagner, bring back Caleb Houston, maybe work out another trade out on the fringes here for Orlando, and try to really pinpoint this roster to once again be able to climb in this Eastern Conference. Last season, before they dealt with injuries, I had them finishing around 4 in the Eastern Conference, and I definitely think they have the potential to definitely finish top 5 barring no injury this season in the Eastern Conference, but could even surprise people as a top 2 or top 3 seed if everything really does click for the Orlando Magic. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, let's look at this now from the Memphis Grizzlies perspective here. The Grizzlies did get 2 contracts in KCP and in Cole Anthony, which we'll get into as well. But they also did receive those 4 first-round picks that we did mention. Now, I do think one key thing for Memphis here was really trying to evaluate what this direction for this team was, and I mentioned that in their offseason breakdown, so if you want to go check that out, definitely do. But basically, the Grizzlies have a key offseason as Jaren Jackson Jr. and John Morant are both extension eligible, and for the Grizzlies, when having Desmond Bane under contract, there was no really flexibility to give both of them a extension, and it seemingly meant that one of them was potentially going to be traded so the other one could get that extension. And that's why in that video I talked about, are they going to trade JJJ, or are they going to trade Ja? But ultimately now with the Memphis Grizzlies, that question does ultimately open up even more, because moving a guy like Desmond Bane, who was locked up on this deal, really does put all the questions out there, right? With this team still dealing with some injuries, still being a little bit younger, getting a new head coach, and being in a tough Western Conference, who is only getting stronger with these young guys, and not having a core that could really put him over the top, is it really the move for the Memphis Grizzlies to still build around this core, or should they completely strip it down and reset? we can kind of go over that as well. But ultimately, I do think for the Grizzlies, the best move is to kind of stay pat and kind of build around either one or both of John Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. alongside some of these other pieces. Now, like I mentioned, for the Grizzlies, they did not have a first-round pick when I did their offseason breakdown, but they just acquired the 16th overall pick this season, which is going to help them save some money. Obviously, they do have to bring in a $4 million contract at pick 16, but that'll free up some money so that they can extend Jaren Jackson Jr. And from the Michael Cole here, one of the Grizzlies beat reporters, we can see this. And I'll add the extra picks / assets will make it easier for Memphis to potentially move another contract in order to create even more space for the Jaren Jackson deal. More moves are definitely expected with this Memphis Grizzlies team, and I would definitely expect that. Obviously, they have some younger guys on this roster, Gigi Jackson, Vince Williams, who said they might be able to consolidate in a trade to go and get some guys. They have some other contracts as well. John Conchar, who's completely fallen in this rotation behind Scottie Pippen, and now a guy in Cole Anthony. Do they use one of those sweeteners to move off his $7 million deal? There's a guy in Brandon Clark, who's been a part of this team for some seasons, but had dealt with some injuries at around $12 to $13 million. Is he a tradable contract for the Memphis Grizzlies that they used to kind of shed some salary to potentially even bring back a guy like Santi Aldama alongside extending Jaren Jackson? Those are key conversations to be having with the Memphis Grizzlies. With adding KCP, with adding Cole Anthony, they do kind of, I wouldn't say, replicate the scoring and shooting of Desmond Bane, because like I mentioned, 50, 40, 90 score, a really, really solid player. They are getting back some offensive prowess if both of these players can play to their peak. We saw KCP last year sign with Orlando, look like a bad contract. And maybe that's why Memphis got even more draft capital for taking on a contract that doesn't look that great in KCP at 2 years, $40 million. But KCP, if he does come back to his peak potential form, is once again one of the better 3-and-D scorers at the 2-guard position, and can really help out a Memphis Grizzlies team who once again wants to really buy in on that defensive end. He complements a guy in John Morant a little bit more, and Cole Anthony has been a little bit of a microwave scorer. Personally, I think that at his best performance, he's going to be a true 6-man, and we've been able to see him have those performances for Orlando in short stints. And I think for the Memphis Grizzlies, you take a guy like KCP out of this lineup, maybe put in a Scottie Pippen and Cole Anthony, and you have your, once again, your playmaking defensive beast in Scottie Pippen, who's going to control the offense, and Cole Anthony, your scorer on the wing that's just going to catch and shoot and just light it up for you, similar to a guy like Desmond Bane would. And you have that kind of contrast with John KCP alongside Scottie Pippen and Cole Anthony. Once again, it's not going to completely replicate the scoring and shooting that you are missing from a guy in Desmond Bane, but it does replace it, and also it gives you two contracts broken down to potentially trade or move off of, compared to one contract that you're really tied up in, giving more money for. And that's where the CBA is really going to come into play with some of these teams. And I think a lot of these cores that we have seen built over these last couple of seasons are going to potentially break down, all due to that, with the new CBA and their restrictions with teams getting into the second apron, and these smaller market teams not wanting to pay all that salary. They're going to make moves to kind of reshuffle their roster, and that's what Memphis did. And with Memphis doing that, now a lot of questions arise with what Memphis does next. As Bobby Manning retweeted this, shout out to him, but our guy Brian Windhorst on ESPN said the next question is what about John Morant? What about Jaren Jackson? As we all know, Jaren Jackson is up for that extension. John Morant is up for that extension. I would expect the Grizzlies to kind of work with both of those guys to get those deals done. But could we see another deal on the market where John Morant does get traded for some other pieces and Jaren Jackson is with a bunch of young guys here at Memphis? Or could we see a deal with Jaren Jackson getting shipped over to Phoenix in a 3-team deal involving Kevin Durant, in which the Memphis Grizzlies get some sort of filler assets in return to really reset their roster, or potentially even set them for that full-on rebuild if they do go on that route and also trade John Morant? There are a lot of questions remaining with this Memphis Grizzlies team, and once again, the offseason is just starting, right? The NBA Finals are still going on, but teams can make trades, but that's not going to obviously stop these teams from trying to figure out what they want to do. And I'm sure we'll see transpire over the next couple of days and weeks leading up to the draft and free agency here, more moves on the market, not only just from the Memphis Grizzlies, but other teams as well, trying to really figure out what they want to do to really reshuffle their roster and put themselves in the best position to be in competing. Once again, I think this trade is a win-win for both sides. The Grizzlies get a first-round pick, get to save some money by trading a guy away in Desmond Bane, and then a core that wasn't really going to put the Grizzlies really anywhere, and which I thought they were going to have to trade one of these guys anyways. it makes sense for them to get a haul for him in future draft capital, which, once again, the Grizzlies have been known for hitting on late draft picks and good draft picks. So if I'm the Grizzlies, I'm taking this any single day of the week. Two players that can kind of replace a player in Desmond Bane's offensive creation. Hopefully KCP can get back to his full form of himself to be that key impact player to also put us in that contention. And then for Orlando, you get the best scorer and shooter, I think, out there on the open market that was available, barring a Trae Young or maybe Tyler Hero trade. But ultimately, you might have to give up more draft capital than you're willing, or even more pieces than you're willing to do for a Desmond Bane trade. So, like I said, for Desmond Bane, I think this is a good move for the Orlando Magic. I think he's going to fit in like a glove right alongside Suggs and Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero. We're really going to see what this Orlando Magic team can really bring in an Eastern Conference if they're fully healthy, with their strong defensive core in nature, with a great three-point scorer and Desmond Bane on the wing. So let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. Let me know what you guys ultimately think down below in the comment section. Who do you think won this trade? And who do you think lost this trade? Or do you think it's a win-win, like I personally do? Like I said, thank you guys so much for tuning into today's video. I really do appreciate all your support. Definitely stay tuned, as we'll have some off-season breakdowns coming out as well today. And I'll catch you guys later. Have a great rest of your day, and peace out.